Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote. Hello, welcome to episode 15 of 23-24 season Across the Park podcast. My name is Ian Mills. Delighted to be joined today by one of my friends and one of the best journalists around, the Everton FC correspondent. He's blushing already. The Everton FC correspondent of Liverpool Echo Joe Thomas. Joe, thanks for joining us again. How are you?
Thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. As much as those kind words, might disagree with some of them, but grateful for them nonetheless.
I mean them, mate, and I'm going to get into why your coverage of Everton has been some of the best around. Before we do get into the weekend, I want to talk a little bit about the coverage the past 7 days it's been since the judgment was handed down last Friday, or at least made public, the deduction of Everton's 10 points. What was it like at the Echo headquarters when that news broke? I imagine it was all hands on deck.
Yeah, it was bedlam, to be perfectly honest. I think we got to a point where we expected the verdict to come in the international break. We didn't have any forewarning, and I think one of the many kind of frustrating things about this process was the lack of clarity over what would happen and when. But you just kind of got that sense that maybe it was building up towards it. It felt like a sensible time for something like that to come out, and almost felt like a degree of inevitability as well, in the sense that, Everton has this, I don't know, it feels like it's cursed at the minute, just as everything looks like it's going all right, and you have 3 consecutive wins in London, and you just grabbed a great, impressive win at Crystal Palace, and you're in an international break thinking, you know what, I can think about my life outside of football for a little bit, rather than thinking, there's almost a degree of, of course that's going to happen. So it was a really complicated process. There's a lot of technical information to try and get to grips with at very short notice, and it's one thing trying to understand it, and it's another thing trying to interpret it, and it's another thing trying to form an opinion on it. And whereas 10-15 years ago and before that, you would have to wait until the next day's paper to kind of do all that. Now there's so much kind of pressure on things to be instant and quick, that adds another degree. It ramps it up a notch. But it came as a shock.
The severity of the penalty, as I've been on this podcast and I've watched other podcasts, and it's all the same. Everton held their hands up. There's guilt. There's mitigation. How much mitigation is viable is another question. But 10 points for me, it's a point more than it would have been for going into administration, staff losing jobs, debts being wiped, creditors being out of pocket. Did it feel that way to you as a professional journalist? Take away the Evertonian and take away covering Everton Football Club and a football fan, as a journalist and professionally, did it feel a bit much? Yeah,
it does. It still does. And that's a position that isn't helped by the lack of clarity within the 41-page judgment as to how they got to 10 points in the first place. And obviously the Premier League hasn't come out and clarified that, added any more information to how they got that point since then, which is also problematic. I think it's an unprecedented penalty, because it's the greatest penalty that's ever been handed to a team in the top flight in English football history in terms of points deduction. There was always going to be a point to which it was going to be unprecedented, because no club has ever been found to have breached profit and sustainability rules before. But that doesn't mean to say that there haven't been cases throughout the Premier League's history, particularly recently, where the Premier League has sought to clamp down on other clubs in a bid to protect its integrity.
Yeah.
And when you read through the judgment, that is the thread of the Premier League's narrative, that they're trying to protect the integrity of their competition. So I think that when you don't have any case studies to compare against that are like for like, you look for similar situations where the Premier League has sought to rally against clubs that have sought to undermine it. And when you look at those other cases, because there are, it looks very, very difficult to see how 10 points could be justified. We have, as you mentioned, their administration, 9 points. Surely that's one of the worst things you could do in football. The impact it has on local communities and on the wider footballing ecosystem, it can often be catastrophic. Obviously, Everton didn't do that. They breach these rules, and they have breached these rules, but £19.5 million, as serious as that is, it's 1/50th of what Chelsea have spent under Todd Bowley.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That isn't to say that they don't deserve punishment, or nor to say that the breach isn't serious. But again, that in comparison to what would happen if, think of all the businesses, the people, community initiatives that would suffer if everyone was to go into administration, well, that would be far more severe. And then, I think rival clubs or certainly the fans of these clubs accuse people who push this as a bit of whataboutery, but I do think that the Super League is a relevant thing to bring into this for context, because, okay, those 6 clubs wouldn't have left the Premier League. It was a Champions League that they were seeking to leave, but by creating a closed shop at the very top of European football, they'd have completely undermined the sporting merit and integrity of the Premier League and the whole English football pyramid. The idea that anyone can get anywhere if they get their decisions right, and for those clubs to have essentially got a £3.5 million fine, pretty much. Again, you can't find like for like comparisons, but you can find other cases where the Premier League has sought to protect its interests from forces that have tried to undermine it. And when you look at those, Everton's penalty remains unprecedented. It's very difficult to see why.
And just touching on the big 6, or whatever you want to call them, that did try and break away and form this closed shop. Look, rightly or wrongly, I think some of the calls at the time were a bit, unjust. Relegate them, give them serious fines. The Premier League and whoever decided amongst the Premier League to give those £3.5 million fines per club, if you remember, what came out with that is we cannot punish supporters for what clubs are doing, for what people who say yes and no make decisions. We can't punish the supporters. I don't see the difference here at all, because this podcast is part of the All Together Now campaign, and we've asked for change, and the groups alongside us and some supporters who've done that have more or less said to everyone listening, we're not happy with how the club's being run, we're concerned, we're fearful of what might happen if this ownership remains. We want them out, we want them changed. We've gone through all of that with full transparency, and I do feel that Evertonians are being punished. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I think one of the things that's getting lost in a lot of this is the idea that a lot of people from outside the Everton bubble still seem to think that Everton deny any wrongdoing, that fans don't think they should be punished at all, and that couldn't be any further from the truth. I think that most fans accept that the club deserves punishment. Even the club accepts the breach now, so punishment of some degree was inevitable. And the reality is that there's been no more vocal and no harsher critic of the way in which Everton Football Club has been run than its own fan base over the past 18 months in particular. But even before then, and you didn't have to look very far to see that writ large, and it was the protests were very, very clear and strong and impactful. When we got into the early stages of this year and the back end of that relegation battle, so fans have been at the forefront of highlighting and questioning some of the decisions that have been made in the running of this club that have led to this situation for quite some time. And then more than it's a fan base that's very, very aware, I think, of the parameters, and a very knowledgeable fan base. And I think it's a very fair-minded fan base, and I think that is the course that's running through the argument here. No one's turning around saying, "Look, don't deserve anything like this, or don't deserve any punishment." It's just that trying to understand where 10 points has come from, the impact that has. That go far beyond the football club itself and the people who have made these decisions.
Last weekend in one of my Everton WhatsApp groups, I said I wish the United game was today, and I think a lot of fans echoed that. Like, they want to get in that ground. I think the Wales was watching. I know Sky had picked that game, pre, the punishments, but it felt like the Wales was watching yesterday, and the build up to it was £40,000 raised towards banners, an aeroplane going over another game that was on TV. If you look in the weeds on social media, there was rumours that Sky were going to try and not shoot certain things, and Everton totally trying to get round it. When there's a ball by the family enclosure, hold something up. Were you surprised at how the Goodison looked and sounded yesterday? Because to me, I was in there quite early, and even when they brought, I know you were probably in the media stand when this happens, even when they brought the Premier League stand out, there was boos, and it felt like every corner of the ground was full, angry, ready. Were you surprised at the noise and the sight, or did it not surprise you?
It didn't surprise me, because I think that, albeit in circumstances that we all wish were different. We wish that as an Everton fan base that was mobilising for European campaigns and silverware. Unfortunately, that's not been the case in recent years, but we have seen several times in the face of adversity just how powerful and how united this fan base can be, and what that can look like. You look back to that Chelsea game under Lampard, the Leicester City away game. You look at the scenes after Crystal Palace, all of that under Lampard. Then you look back to last season, and you think about Bournemouth that final day. This is a fan base and a stadium that can do things that others simply can't. Most other clubs in the world can't match the intensity, I don't think, of Everton fans at Goodison. So I think that, combined with I understand what you're saying about the delay between the judgment and the game, and I think that probably would have affected the players. I think from a footballing perspective, it probably would have been better for Everton if they hadn't had that international break and they were going into this Manchester United game fresh on the heels of both that punishment and that really, really important and impressive, resilient win at Crystal Palace. So I can imagine for the players, especially with them being dispersed all over the world on holiday and international duty, probably would have been a really weird 8-9 days. And it wasn't until Friday morning that the full squad was back together. And that's when Sean Dyche held his first kind of proper team briefing following the deduction. So it's on the one hand, from a footballing perspective, the preparations were far from ideal. But I think that from a fan perspective, they were good, because when you look at what the 1878s and other influential fan groups such as the Fan Advisory Board have managed to do in the past 8 days, obviously they raised a lot of money, but they also created a lot of unity, and they created a campaign that, as you saw yesterday, so emphatically, the best part of 40,000 Everton fans were all able to get behind, and they did so, unanimously. And I thought that was really impressive. And like I haven't had time yet to go back and look at how the coverage actually played out. Obviously, I was very privileged to be in the stadium and see it myself. But when I was in there, it was, it lived up to every bit of expectation that you hoped would be achieved. I think a lot of the emotion going into this week was hoping that the hard work of those fan elements would pay off, and I think it really, really did. And obviously we know what happened on the pitch, and that was unfortunate. It was always a possibility, but I don't think that what happened on the pitch should undermine what happened off it.
No,
I think the main takeaway should be look at everything that those fans achieved yesterday, and okay, the watching world might not have seen it. Some big chunks it might have been cut out, but it was still there, and that's still important. That's still relevant, and something to cling on, and a platform of strength to build on going forward. Yeah,
you mentioned there, Joe, that on the pitch, and I do want to get to the United game. Just quickly before we do, where you sit in the media section, I imagine there was impartial journalists, there was Manchester United journalists as well as Everton. What was the reaction in the media section to the angle in the ground?
I think that a lot of and you see this a lot with visiting reporters when they come to. When they come to Goodison Park, people aren't used to being there week in, week out, surprised by the intensity of the atmosphere and what the environment that Goodison is capable of creating. I remember when Newcastle, obviously, again, it was another game where there was a big build-up that unfortunately events on the pitch didn't work out as we hoped. But I remember being at the Newcastle game in the spring, and obviously it ended up being the 4-1 defeat that I think probably left most of us thinking that relegation, if not a probability, was a genuine threat at that point, such was the manner of the defeat. But if you remember, and it's hard to go back and remember this now, that first 30 minutes, Everton were on top and Newcastle looked really, really rattled. And I remember looking at some of their players and thinking, I don't think they want to be there. I remember hearing one of the Newcastle journalists behind me, because obviously at that point Newcastle, and obviously they continued this, we're looking at Champions League football, and I can remember hearing one of the Newcastle journalists say, one of the things that Newcastle are going to have to learn if they want to play in European football and compete at the top end of the Premier League is how to cope with hostile atmospheres, because it looked like a team that was struggling to cope with what Goodison was creating. Now, they rode through the storm. Everton, kind of how we've seen so many times this season, didn't get the early goal that they probably needed to kickstart a successful 90 minutes and get a good result. And in the end, Newcastle's quality and Everton's fragility shined through. But those words still kind of stuck with me because, I think that is a sense that opposition players and opposition fans, opposition journalists do still very much get when they come to Goodison. I think that certainly would have been the case yesterday. I think a lot of people blown away by what they saw, I think it's probably worth, for people that are interested enough, it would be interesting to go back to the social media timelines, say, of Manchester United journalists or independent national journalists, back to 4 till 4:35 yesterday, and look at what they are saying and what they are tweeting and the videos and the pictures that they are showing, and compare that to perhaps what was being shown on TV at the same time. And if they were to do that, then they might have two contrasting narratives, and it'd probably be really insightful to do that.
Well, I am that much of a weirdo that I'm going to do that tonight. Now, you've put that in my head that I am actually going to go and do that tonight. Talking about the game, Joe, I was really dejected after the game. I took my little boy, and obviously 5-year-olds react very, very differently to defeats. There was upset and things, but I felt quite dejected by the performance. And then I got home and I seen stats, and the stats pulled 22 shots, and you look at it and go, if you didn't put the score on there, you think Everton would have won the game. The naked eye to me was a little bit different. And what I mean by that initially is the first 20 minutes. I thought that atmosphere, that cauldron, was built for press, tackle, minute 1, minute 2, minute 3. It didn't quite happen there. Goalkeeper Onana seemed to have a lot of time on the ball to pick his passes. And I don't know if we were set up that way. I don't know whether we went into default modes and just played that way. But I think the first 20 minutes, I felt a little bit let down. Can you understand that?
Yeah, and I probably agree with that as well, to be honest. It didn't quite... the intensity in the stands wasn't quite matched on the pitch. I think particularly when as good a form as Manchester United are in, and the talent that we know they've got in their squad, there's also fragility there. Yeah. And it felt really that it would be a good opportunity to press them hard and press them early. And yet I think there was probably a willingness to allow Onana to have the ball. And that probably perhaps was a bit of naivety in that, because he's been someone that's been brought there for his ball playing ability, and
True.
Okay, he hasn't shown it that much at Manchester United. He's had a difficult start to his career. It's still there, and I thought the combination that hurt Everton was the Onana and Kobe Mainoo little partnership.
I agree.
Having someone, a mobile number 6 that was willing to split the centre-backs, come in, and basically his willingness to receive the ball 20 yards out facing his own goal, it just meant that all of a sudden Decore and Calvert-Lewin were split. So Everton had 2 pressing against 3 players, outnumbered, and then the rest of the team isn't pushed up behind them. So all of a sudden you've got Mainoo turns, and he's got all the space in the world to then try and get Manchester United up the pitch, and that hurt. Obviously, I'm sure we'll speak about the goal. The goal was phenomenal. It comes out of nowhere.
It's the most Everton thing ever. Really,
yeah, it is. Do you know what? Like, I think that the mad thing about that goal, as special as it was, is, and I think it probably goes to show for perhaps where the mindset of a lot of Everton fans are at the moment, and a lot of people in and around the club and are used to dealing with the club, is that as sensational as that goal was, I think that once people saw the cross go in and saw him backpedaling, shaping up, I think it was almost an expectation that something like that would happen. It sounds daft for what is probably one of the finest goals in Premier League history, but I think given the way in which circumstances seem to collude against Everton, I think a lot of people are saying thought, this is probably going to be. This is more likely to go in and be shinned halfway up the Gladys Street, isn't it? And obviously it did, and it was a phenomenal goal. But again, that turn of events, it just feels so Everton at the minute. It's just so frustrating.
It probably, on any other scenario, it would have got a smattering of applause from some fans, because it was so early in the game and Everton was still in it. And fair play to everyone in that ground. They've got right behind the team again. The Everton song sort of drowns out the United celebrations. But you're right, the world are watching for us, and then that happens to us. Proper Everton. A little bit more in the detail, Joe, of the game itself. I was really disappointed in our wide players for whatever reason. And again, I don't want to point at individual players or the manager. I don't know why we played the way we played, so it's not fair for me to blame A, B or C. But Dwight McNeil, for me, he's not really been at it. I'm not too sure whether he's coming back from his injury still. I'd like to think that it's been 4, 5, 6 weeks now, so he should be over that. But is it a bit of a concern because he was such an important part of why we stayed up last season when Sean Dyche came in? He was putting goals on there, his work rate. Haven't quite seen it yet. Is there something there with Dwight McNeil? Is he fit or?
I can see his work rate. I think the reality is he's probably whether it's something that's been signposted or not, he's doing a different job to what he was doing at the back end of last season because the difference is that now Everton have a fit and firing Dominic Calvert-Lewin up top, and they didn't have that, so there was more pressure on him to produce an attacking threat at the back end of last season and contribute with goals. And obviously, there is still that necessity and that need for goals in the Everton side. But when you look at this season, chance creation and goal scoring haven't been the issue. So I think that it's probably easy to look at Dwight McNeil and say he's not scoring goals, but he is part of a framework there that scored 3 goals at Crystal Palace, scored 3 goals at Brentford, scored 2 goals. Aston Villa scored 3 goals against Bournemouth, and I think that the way in which that setup works, if you take any one element of it, it all falls down. Okay, Dwight M'Neil's perhaps not had the attacking numbers, but you look at Jack Harris on the other side. Obviously got the goal against Bournemouth, had a number of assists, including the one against Palace, set up for Mikalenko. We don't see much from the wide players in terms of beating players, beating defenders, getting to the byline. And it's not that much that we don't see much overlapping from the fullbacks either. A bit more Mikalenko, obviously got the goals recently. So I think it's very difficult to watch a game and be excited by what you're seeing the wingers do. But I don't think that necessarily means they haven't been effective. And I think when you look at that first half, it took probably 15 minutes after the goal for Everton to get back into the game. But then they had that 25-minute period when really they should have scored. And if you look at the chances that were created, well, one of them, I'm trying to think, obviously, there was Dominic Calvert-Lewin header from an Ashley Young cross that obviously come out wide. He was overlapping from Harrison. I'm not sure. It might have been McNeil who played the ball across for Decore. I mean, that was the big chance that I thought. So they're not as obvious, but that doesn't mean to say that there isn't good work being done out wide. I think it's just a little bit harder to acknowledge because the way in which Dyche sets this sides up, they're almost playing certainly on the left with it's almost like you've got a left back and a left wing back, isn't it? And that makes it harder. So I don't think I'd be panicking over Dwight McNeil at the minute, and I don't think I'd be panicking over Everton's creation of chances. Again, that was another very good aspect of yesterday. It wasn't just they had 24 shots; they had a number of very good opportunities. But once again, we come back to that situation with what happens if they don't get the goal, and we saw that yesterday.
Well, the manager said that. I'm not too sure whether it was pre or post game, but a journalist asked him about home form, and he said that the form's been fine bar Luton. We battered Wolves, we battered Fulham, we just couldn't score. Yesterday, a little bit along the same lines. If Decore makes it 1-1 and then Calvert-Lewin puts the header away, you go in 2-1 at half time. It's a completely different game. But for whatever reason, we're not winning enough games at Goodison.
No.
We've got Chelsea and Newcastle coming up in the next 2 to 3 weeks who are teams that for different reasons need points. They're going to come to Goodison and they're going to say we can win at Goodison, we have to win at Goodison. Tough games. How do we find a way to start winning games at Goodison? Because what's happened to us with this deduction, for me, Joe, it means our home form has to be a lot better.
It's a question I don't have the answer to because part of me feels a little bit for Dyche in this because when he talks about things like XG and underlying stats, and they mean different things for different people. There are multiple ways to watch a football match, but the reality is that those statistics matter in the world of football because everybody at Finch Farm will be talking and looking at those things and judging their performances by them to a certain extent. And there's a lot to take heart from. One thing that we've seen under Dyche, is he's created Everton sides that create lots and lots of chances. And as kind of just mentioned with the amount of goals that have been scored, they do take chances. They do score. They do score goals. But it's strange how a team that creates so many chances and scores a decent amount, healthy amount of goals over recent weeks and months still looks strangely impotent. And I it's the lack of the clinical edge, really, isn't it? I think it's particularly when you see it's a side that doesn't tend to do well when it goes behind, but then does very well if it takes a lead. It's more about the mentality of, it's not about creating 20 chances that you miss. It's about creating the one chance that you score. And that's where they need that ruthless edge. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin is very good at that. But there's a lot of pressure on him. And I suppose the problem that Everton have with the threadbare squad is that more pressure falls onto the likes of McNeil and Decore and Harrison. And these aren't predators. They're players that can score goals rather than goal scorers. And I think that shows a little bit with Everton sometimes. You need to create the free chances for Decore to get the one goal. And probably the same with some of the others. And that shows, I think, because obviously you can only do so much in a game. But I don't actually know the answer. Like, I wish I did. Because the thing was, when Dominic Calvert-Lewin wasn't there, you could say, well, maybe the answer is in buying a high class or up and coming centre forward that can take advantage of these chances. But in Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Everton have a player that is far more able than anything they could afford, and he is scoring goals this season. But he doesn't score every chance, and then that creates additional pressure on everybody else. How Everton get around that? I don't know how Everton get around it without carrying on doing what they're already doing, and just hoping that more often than not they'll end up being okay. But whereas we've seen away from home, that might be the case. At home, it clearly isn't the case because we have case study after case study. And one thing that is absolutely undoubtable, as you just mentioned there, is that's got to change. The form of Game Judas has to change now that they've got that 10-point deduction.
100%. What works away isn't working at home. And it goes back to where I really wanted Everton to start brightly and aggressively yesterday's game. And I understand the argument for Everton should have won the game. I completely understand that. But I'd like to see Everton when they play Chelsea. I'd like to see Everton play Newcastle under the lights, Newcastle especially. I'd like to see Everton really take the game and just throw caution to the wind. It's a home game that we're probably not likely to win. People won't like that, but we're not likely to win it. Go and try and win it from minute one. I'd really like that. Joe, we announced on our Twitter that you were on today and we invited some questions for you. So I've picked a few. Zed on Twitter, his opinion is that Sean Dyche's blind spot is currently Ashley Young. He adds that it looks like he doesn't trust Nathan Patterson, but now Seamus Coleman is fit again. Can you see Seamus Coleman now starting games over Ashley Young?
I think Seamus Coleman's return to fitness helps Sean Dyche a lot, really, because I think we've all Ashley has had the best of starts of the season. So there have been games where he's good, and I thought he was very good against Brighton. But then there have been games that he's struggling as well. Obviously, the Liverpool one is the most obvious. And it's very frustrating how he keeps on picking up yellow cards, and often early, and that inhibits what he can do. So, like even yesterday, he got that early yellow card, and you're just there thinking, to be honest, he gave away the penalty. Sean Dyche complains about the penalty from a process point of view. I think he's got a point. What is clear and obvious? Are the referees on the pitch supposed to have the most power? In which case, surely it has to be something massive to overturn it. But ultimately, from what I've seen of that penalty, I think that Everton were actually just lucky it didn't get given straight away. And I think if it had got given straight away, I think Young's probably in the book and he's off. So it probably needs a little bit of time for reassessment. But I don't think that Sean Dyche publicly would necessarily admit that. What Seamus Coleman's return allows him to do, if he wants to, is it gives him an opportunity to make that change, take Young out the firing line for a little bit, without there being the opportunity necessarily say, look, you're acknowledging that you've perhaps made a mistake or persevered a little bit too long on it. It gives him an easy option which he can save. He can make the change but still save face, because you said, well, the club captain's back, so I'm obviously going to give him a chance.
True.
So I think that he has more leeway to make that change than he had with Nathan Patterson, who it does seem to be a bit of an issue. He speaks highly of Nathan Patterson when you ask him, but he very much speaks highly of him as a player for the future. Now, I think there's probably an argument to say, well, when is that future going to be? Might be next season. There might be a long-term strategy where it's like build him up for next season when there's a chance that neither Coleman nor Young will be at the club because their contracts run out. But I think the supporters are asking the question, does Dyche trust Patterson? I think given what we've seen over the last 10 months, I think they're entitled to ask that question. I can understand where it's coming from. I like Patterson. I thought he did well at the beginning of last season when he got his first true run in the side. And he survived the change of Lampard's change from 5 at the back to 4 at the back. And he was doing okay. Remember the Derby game, the 0-0, he played really well. The problem was he picked up an injury and it just, it stunted his momentum, and he's struggled ever since then to get back into the side for reasons that probably aren't his fault. But I think that the answer to Zed's question is I think Coleman probably offers Dyche a solution to the issue right back at the minute without having to lose face over it. So probably see a change there.
Possibly earlier Saturday, a big game at Forest on Saturday evening.
Huge game.
Chris Campbell on Twitter, he said, can Joe give us an update on Dele Alli? The manager seems very generic with his responses. He's back on the grass, he's not on the grass. How long until Dele Alli's going to be fit?
Yeah.
And do you see Dele Alli actually getting game time this season for Everton?
Yeah, I think he's going to be touch and go whether he's back this side of Christmas.
Okay.
I think it's still. I think he's still at the best case scenario. I think he's still some weeks away. Where obviously we have probably become accustomed to the idea that there's two types of fitness with Sean Dyche. There's standard match fitness, and then there's Dyche fit.
Yeah. I
think that when you see the way in which he was patient with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, he'll probably continue that patience with Dele. So
can you see a role for Dele in this team?
I can see a role for Dele in this team. I can. I mean, if Dele could get to 30% of what he was doing, producing 2018-19 for Spurs in England, he adds something completely different to the Sevens side. I kind of, albeit he's not necessarily someone that would run with the ball. I kind of noticed this Crystal Palace when we had Eberechi Eze playing at Everton. Just that little dynamic spark of someone that can pick up the ball in the middle of the pitch and run and be creative with it, is something that Everton really, really miss. Now, Dele isn't the same type of player as Eze, but that kind of creativity, that innovation, the Dele has, the footballing intelligence, I think is something that, if I'm honest, I think it's something that's missing, particularly from the Everton centre midfield three. I think the four players who are competing for those three spots all bring positive attributes to the team, but I don't think either of them have the attacking intelligence, the creative intelligence that Dele does. So if there was a way of getting him on the pitch, I think that Dyche's threshold to bring him in, both in terms of fitness and where he's at, will be very high. If he was to get to that point where Dyche was satisfied that he could do a job, then absolutely no doubt that he could have a role in that team. Obviously, you've also got the issue with the money that would come in. But yeah, I would be surprised if we saw him before Christmas. That's not to say he won't be fit before Christmas, but there's that whole Dyche. We've got 8 games, haven't we, in December? So there might come a point, maybe around the Fulham Carabao Cup game, where Dyche might start to go, will I make a little bit of a leeway on my demands in terms of threshold of fitness to try and fast track him back into it, to try and add a bit more depth and competition into this side. So maybe, but I wouldn't be gambling on him to be certainly not available for Forest or maybe that Chelsea and Newcastle game. I think they'll be too soon.
Okay. Adam on Twitter as well, asking again, they want all the behind the scenes questions. They're asking the right stuff here, Joe. I've got you on. Can you give us any sort of update on a potential takeover from the 777 group? Do you have an idea when it will be done? And a follow-up question is Adam's also asked, does the points deduction make 777 group think twice of the purchase, or are they still invested in?
I think they're still invested. I think they knew that there was potential something like this could happen. Obviously they knew that there was this prosecution of Everton going on in the background when they've had these talks, and I think that there was always a feeling within the camp at Everton that there was a chance that they could be made an example of here, and that the punishment might be more severe than perhaps most people have anticipated. Still don't think they probably thought it would be as severe as it is, but clearly I think there was always that potential. I think that 777's framework of reference is probably more in relation to survival and relegation rather than points deduction, which obviously feeds into that. And I think even in the case of relegation, I think there are contingency plans in terms of how much they would pay and when and how the deal would look, which would mean that they would still have an interest in Everton even if there was to be a severe threat of relegation. To what extent they kind of made those plans hoping that they would never actually have to kind of consider them in reality is they might have been hoping for the best, and I think there's a degree of fairness in that when you look at where Everton were operating. Well, they went into the international break 8 points clear of a relegation battle, didn't they? So I mean, so I don't think that it'll impact it.
Is it close to completion? Do you know?
I don't know. Is the perfect? Obviously, again, it's a behind closed doors process that the Premier League and other organisations are going on. Now, when it was announced, the idea was that they thought it would be completed this year. Mm-hmm. I think that was a hopeful framework. I think these are naturally quite complicated. I think probably some of it depends on how much rigour the people like the Premier League are going to apply to those accounts. If they were to apply the same rigour as they've applied to Everton's accounts in relation to this profit and sustainability breach, then you can imagine it will probably take some time. So I wouldn't be too surprised if it was to stretch into the new year. And it's going to be a really interesting. The timing is important because obviously you have things like the January transfer window and things like that. So, and this is a club that could do with however you read things, could do with morale boost and things like that. I don't know if 777 taking over would necessarily provide that. I think that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Yeah, of course. And I think that perhaps what this points deduction does is, one, it takes the attention off, some of the attention off 777 and their ambitions and their suitability for as potential owners of Everton. And two, it also probably adds another layer of complexity for them and the club in terms of being public about what they're saying. So we're probably likely to hear less as a result of the points deduction, as everything becomes a little bit more secretive. So yeah, I can't give an accurate assessment of when it's going to be. The hope was always it would be before Christmas if it was to get approved in the first place. That's obviously getting closer and closer. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it stretched a little bit longer than that. I don't think the deduction at this present moment in time will hinder 777's ambitions in relation to Everton. But again, whether or not they kind of complicate some of the matters around the takeover itself and perhaps delay the process, that's probably something that we've got to be alive to.
That's fair. I've picked two more questions, Joe, for you, and a little bit personal, if you don't mind. And probably the most personal question a man can be asked. Red or brown sauce on a sausage toastie?
Yeah, I'm a red sauce man.
Oh,
I know that is controversial. I'm not really a big fan of brown. So.
Oh, Steve, I hope you got the answer that you wanted there, mate. I didn't get the answer that I wanted. I'm brown all day. And Jess, I think this is a really good question from Jess, Joe. She's when you're sitting in the media section, I imagine that you have to show a degree of professionalism and be impartial. Is it hard to keep emotions in check when Abdoulaye Doucouré scores past Bournemouth?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is hard. I mean, full transparency, I grew up a Shrewsbury Town fan, so I've got a lot of blue season ticket holders in my family. The club's always been close to me, but that probably removes me one step a little bit. But the thing is that I've always, Everton's always been a club that's close to my heart, but now it's over the past 16 months that I didn't. It's my life. Yeah. Like Everton is just my life now. Yeah. And it's very difficult to kind of separate personal and professional now because obviously I want the club to do well. Like, I want the players who I haven't had the proximity as I've had and to this incredible fan base. So like I want them to be celebrating the right things and. You're just so desperate for the club as a whole, and it can be. So I would say that the one time that I can look back on and say that I just broke the kind of unspoken rule and celebrated, I just couldn't keep my emotions in check, was Mikalenko's volley against Leicester under Lampard, the 2-1 win.
At Leicester.
Obviously, it came off the back of that incredible win over Chelsea. Everyone went into that game 5 points adrift, and then we had all that. The coach welcome,
and
then the amazing win, and then that kind of fed into the build up to the Leicester game, where you had those scenes at Finch Farm, and just being there and just seeing the away end even before the game. And obviously, with Everton's away record being so bad as well at the time, kind of still going into that game with a bit of trepidation. When Mikalenko scored, obviously how much that goal meant, the nature of the goal as well, because it was a screamer, and also the player who it was, because I think we all know that
of course
he's a player that's going through a lot personally at this present moment in time. Yeah, I celebrated that, and I really, I clearly struggled to keep my emotions in check. I celebrated it. So the Doucouré against Bournemouth, I think I was I think I managed to keep my emotions in check. The Palace comeback was just a mad one.
Oh, the Lewin.
I tell you what I find harder is I'm relatively good at maintaining my calm when goals are scored. It's more the ebb and flow of a match and the decisions that I struggle with. So it's like where I kind of really have a fight is when I think like bad refereeing decisions against Everton, when I'm just sitting there and I'm just like, so, having Kanate, the second yellow card against Liverpool, like I just, you're just so overwhelmingly, and there's a little bit like that with Eze Palace in the first half, because he was already on a yellow card and he'd had a second foul. And then there was a moment when Garner in the first half picks up the ball and has a shot. And he fluffs it because I thought he was fouled by Eze.
I remember it, yeah.
And the ref waved play on, but I thought it was a foul. And I thought it was a foul. He had to go off, and obviously one that would have meant a lot in terms of the game. And obviously it meant a lot because of how good a player Eze was. Obviously Everton went on to win, but it's those kind of nitty gritty bits. It's those like little picky bits I really struggle with. I remember at Wolves last season was a really interesting one because obviously Everton scored Yerry Mina in the 99th minute.
Yeah.
And there were, with the press box, so the press box is always embedded within the home fans.
Of course, yeah.
So obviously there are different sizes of press box and things like that, but you normally end up, say, one of your boundaries is with the director's box and the hospitality, and then the rest is obviously home fans and season ticket holders and things like that. And I remember when Yerry Mina scored, there were big celebrations of that goal at Molineux in the home stand, and it actually led to a big kick-off around it as the Wolves supporters were complaining and shouting.
Blue media, there's a blue media.
Blue media, yeah. I know that we were a little bit further away, so I don't know if that's the same reaction, but I think Kevin Farwell celebrated in a director's box as well.
Oh, he's from history with Wolves as well.
So Farwell, I think he celebrated that goal. I didn't see that, but I think he's spoken about it since. But those celebrations really, really riled up the Wolves fans. And as we were going back in, there were Wolves supporters complaining to security inside the stadium and trying to point out the people that celebrated because they were that angered by, goal meant nothing to Wolves, whether they won or drew that game. Yeah. But there was real kind of animosity around what happened. And obviously it is something that you kind of want to retain your professional integrity with. But like I began this answer by saying, the reality is that Everton is now a large chunk of my life, so it's impossible for me to not get caught up in the emotions or something. And whilst I'd say probably 92% of the time I'm all right, that Mykolenko goal, it's just the Palace comeback was the sense of the occasion was so enormous that it almost made it easy to shut out and just focus on work because I knew I had to get down the history that was being made in front of me. But that Mykolenko goal, it would probably surprise a lot of people listening that was a goal that tipped me over the edge, but it was, yeah. So
I've got visions of you at a Palace just doing that to the referee when there's a card and that causing Royal Rumbles at Molineux.
The Jordan Ayew not getting sent off in that game, I probably would have had more of a reaction. And obviously, it's less of an issue at Goodison because the fans are surrounded by Everton fans. But yeah, I think I probably would have had a more of a visceral, obvious open display of emotion when Ayew didn't get sent off for that knee-high lunge on Anthony Gordon I probably did when Calvert-Lewin scores the winner. Yeah. So that's what gets to me.
There's different vices, isn't there? Everyone's got the vice, and yours is a wrong referee decision.
That's it.
Against the mighty Blues. 2 more questions from me, Joe, before we let you go.
Yeah, of course.
You're a busy man, and we really do appreciate you coming in. The appeal, what I'm hearing is in. The Everton Football Club have put the appeal in. Do we have much chance of getting a result in this, getting a reduced punishment? Because we're going to get a punishment. We've admitted guilt. Do Everton, in your opinion, have a case to get this reduced?
I mean, it would seem so. I think the biggest hole not the biggest hole, but one of the issues that the Premier League have got in their judgment or the independent commission is that they don't really set out the framework. It's Andy Burnham's point. They don't really set out the framework by which they've judged Everton. So I think their best challenge is probably less on making more of the mitigating circumstances and more on complaining about the process in the first place. Was this, was due process followed? Was this a process that to a certain extent was made up as it went along? And it seems to be that was the case. So I think that there must be a chance of it being reduced. I don't think it'd be reduced significantly, but I think their strongest argument will probably be around the technicalities of the process rather than the breach itself.
Okay.
Because obviously they admit the breach, and whilst a lot of the conversation around the breach is centred on very specific financial elements like interest on loan payments and whether those loans were used for the stadium or for day-to-day running of the club, and 4% transfer levies and where that's gone and things like that. The reality is it's a judgment on the Mashiri years and the excess spend. It's I think Everton are better off less focusing on the handful of millions here and there that might have taken them over the edge of the limit, and when really the issue is how they got so close to that limit in the first place. And I think we don't need to cover we'd be covering old ground if we went into that. And I think that's a lot about what was the protests were about at the beginning of the season. That's not to say that I don't think that they do have genuine argument with some of those mitigating circumstances. There are a lot of unforeseen events that have held Everton back a little bit. And if you said one of those things was to happen, you'd say that's unfortunate. 2 or 3 of them happening, it's just again, come back to this idea that the club is it just can't get any luck at the minute. I think for all the bad decisions that have been made over recent years at this club, it is also a club that hasn't had very much luck. Now, obviously, that's not the argument they can make to the commission, but there'll be a new panel that they can make their arguments to. I think there are probably a few elements of the mitigating factors where they could have made stronger arguments and didn't. So perhaps maybe if they focus their attention on on strengthening some parts of their argument, I think that they might hold sway. But I think the biggest issue has got to be the severity, the lack of precedent, the lack of a framework or explanation as to how that penalty was reached. And then also, like I said earlier, just on those few occasions where you perhaps do have a little bit of context to compare this against. In particular, I still think that administration, 9 points, is a more severe thing for the world of football than what Everton admit doing. So how Everton's breach can warrant a bigger punishment than administration is completely lost on me, even more so when the Premier League, again, interesting, but the Premier League don't accuse Everton of dishonesty, and the Commission don't accuse Everton of deliberately breaching the rules. So for all that there is this argument around perhaps Everton being accused of misleading the Commission on certain elements, I don't really understand how that allegation can override what are the conclusions of both of the other parties, which is, we're not saying this was dishonest and we're not saying this was deliberate. So it's, I think there is a degree to which everyone can have justified complaint over that. And if they can get a few points back, because I think that's probably the best case scenario, well, that might actually make a big difference. Let's
work on final question, Joe. Let's work on a basis that we get no points back. 10 points stands. Are you confident that Everton still have enough to be out of danger by May? Can you promise me I'm going to sleep on the last week of the season?
Can't promise you're going to be able to sleep for the next few months. I do think Everton have enough. I do think Everton will survive
with the 10 points.
With the 10 points. I do. I think that probably one of the crueler things around the way this has panned out is that I think Everton was set up for a season through which they weren't going to be taking it down to the last week of the season as they have in the last 2. I thought that they were creating sustained progress, which was going to get them into a position maybe next back end of March, April, where they'd be able to plan properly for the summer, knowing that they were going to be in the Premier League. So rather than have to have contingency plans in case of relegation, they would be able to plan knowing that they're going to be in the Premier League. And next summer is a crucial summer for Everton because there's a huge amount of squad turnover. And it's the first opportunity for Kevin Farwell to really get to grips and reshape this squad. And it's a shame because obviously the whole point of the financial rules is to try and encourage clubs to be more sustainable. And I think Everton are a club that are already on that path of having learned the lessons of the past. And, getting themselves to a more sustainable footing, the merit payments and crucial, and 10 points might be the difference between finishing 14th and 17th.
Of course, yeah.
And that could be £6-8 million, and that
That's
matters.
A lot of money,
that's a lot of money that matters. And they're also in a position. They were also looking towards to get into a position where they could perhaps build a competitive Premier League squad next season, but be able to do it on a budget far easier than recently, because they'd have that planning head start that they haven't had in recent seasons. And again, that is probably, I think that's where Everton will suffer here. I think that's what's being taken away, that head start on planning for next season, and that real opportunity to build on the progress. I think that as much as it hasn't been perfect so far this season, and there have been difficult games and disappointing performances, I think we can all see that things are improving there. And it does seem to be sustained, and it does seem to be a club that is getting stronger and more resilient. And now they're losing their opportunity to carry on building that, carry on with that momentum, because they're getting dragged back into another fight. I'm a bit worried about December. Forest is a big game on Sunday. Because whilst I do ultimately think that Everton will claw the points back, there probably is a scenario in which at some point during the season we have a few sleepless nights, and it might be this run of fixtures, because all of a sudden the December of 8 games that looked like it was going to be, I was looking at a Christmas period, I was thinking, it can be a Christmas period where my professional life is about the football and what happens on the pitch. And, we can go into games against Chelsea, and you could go to Spurs, play against Man City with a little bit of freedom because of the buffer that they built up from the relegation battle. Go into that Fulham Carabao Cup game thinking, there's cup run is on here. And that there could be a scenario where post-Christmas that we can say that that's the priority, because we're relatively comfortable with where Everton are on the pitch. And now all of a sudden it's starting to look a bit like, obviously Luton got that win the other day. Forest is a difficult place to go to. If Everton don't win there, then Burnley and Sheffield United play each other, so that they'll pick up points in one way or another. And then all of a sudden you have Chelsea and Newcastle, both clubs that have their vulnerabilities, but both that also have a lot of talent. 6 points against Burnley, and it's Spurs away, Man City at home. So I can't promise that it's going to be a pleasant Christmas, but I do still think that there's enough in this club for them to stay up. I think they will stay up. I think the problem is for all of us, one, we might have a little bit of a nervier Christmas, and two, it might be a case of beginning of May that we're putting our feet up rather than perhaps the end of March, and I think that'll hurt all of us. But as long as they get there, then that's the most important thing.
Joe, I'll take your word for it. Start of May, I'm going to be feet up. I'm going to be comfortable. But I do agree. December's going to be hairy. I think there's going to be a moment in time where Everton may be looking up a little bit, and I think it's what I do think it's important is I think yesterday in the ground and the result and the frustration. Let's not let that harm us as a fan base. We're together. We know now the job is going to be a 5 or 6 month job. It's not going to be a 1 month job or a 5 or 6 week job. So I agree. December's going to be tough. But look, this football club at times has pulled results out. When you mentioned Chelsea there 2 seasons ago, 5 points in the zone, and look what happened there. Yeah,
this club has faced a lot of adversity in recent years, and I think that I think it's in a different place now, and a much stronger place to deal with it and combat it than it has been recently. And I think that that should be the main takeaway from yesterday, both on and off the pitch. I think if you take away the scoreline, obviously it hurts. And it's another game that Everton have lost and not got points from, but there were elements of the performance which still provide hope going forward. And then what we've seen off the pitch in relation to the supporters and the way in which they've united should give a great deal of encouragement for everybody going into December and then the new year.
Joe, it's been great to get you on again. When I texted you last week, I thought I've only had him on a couple of weeks back, but you've been really gracious with your time, so I do appreciate it. Anybody who doesn't know who Joe is, where have you been? He's the guy who sticks up for fans, sticks up for the club in the Liverpool Echo. If you like me and you're old school, he writes in the Liverpool Echo. Go to the back page, go straight to Everton. If you're online, go to liverpoolecho.co.uk, click the Everton bit, and this guy's responsible for a lot of great content, and also the host of one of the best Everton podcasts, the Royal Blue podcast. But Joe, from me and Across the Park podcast, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me on. Thank you. And thanks for the questions as well. Really appreciate them.
Yeah, you've got to ask about the Reds or Brown, haven't you? Thanks for the questions on Twitter, which is @AcrossTheParkPC. We also @AcrossTheParkPC on Instagram. You'll be glad to know Judgy's tagging back in this week. You've seen an awful lot of me last week with 4 shows. Judgy's back this week to talk to Nottingham Forest fan and preview this Saturday's huge game. Thank you to the amazing Pod Cafe studios here in the Baltic Quarter for having us and hosting us again. Amazing guys, and they're tagged in our bio as well. If any young content creators want to come and have a chat down here, the guys will speak to you and give you some really good rates as well. But look, great to have Joe on, and as I said, togetherness, yesterday's results shall not alter, and it should not and will not alter our togetherness. Everton, aren't we? Up the toffees.